It's been a while, and I have to say that preparing for this particular salon put me in a crisis of conscience more than anything else. Because, and I didn't expect it, but really thinking about laziness is something that is very deep. Am I resounding a little too much? Maybe we should reduce the level a little. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so, okay, it's summer, and you think, okay, she thought of laziness because it's summer. Well, there are some other reasons why, but I'll get to them later. But when I started really digging through what laziness means and how it connects to this idea of over-efficiency and how we're all kind of working too much, it really gave me a lot of food for thought. So today I'm going to take you through what Alex has put together as an introduction to the theme of laziness, and then we have some great speakers that will help us think about it more. So I'm going to take out Guy Debord for just a moment. No, I'm going to leave him there because it's always interesting to see his work, the situationist work. But if you think of the idea of laziness, there are so many different connotations, and each connotation is engendered by something else. Think about it for a moment. Sloth, acedia, idleness, indolence, lethargy, dolce far niente. In the Philippines, that would be a tambay, avolition, catatonia, complacency, apathy. We can go on for a really long time. It's a matter of context. And if you look at science, the context is maybe a little clearer. I was looking, for instance, at neuropsychology, the idea of the principle of least effort. So the brain is an incredibly energy-expensive organ. It consumes 20% of our energy. And neuropsychology studies shows that humans and animals are biologically wired to minimize effort while obtaining the maximum outcome. So this idea of getting really at the lowest denominator, or in physics, it's the idea of inertia, the Newtonian physics, the fact that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion unless there are forces that interact. So this physicality and also psychology of laziness is incredibly important. And where we are right now is that the idea of work's important and that goes beyond mere subsistence is something that is relatively recent. And you see here, today we look at laziness from the apex of hustle work culture, right? So two relatively recent, not super recent, but two texts that have become really germinal in the study of laziness are this by Byung-Chul Han, The Burnout Society, and then Jonathan Crary, 24/7, Late Capitalism and the Ends of Sleep. 2010, 2014, it's a particular moment in history. So Han argues that we have transitioned from a disciplinary society in which individuals acquiesce to society's norm for fear of being disciplined or imprisoned to an achievement society in which we self-inflict pressure on ourselves just to produce and thrive more. It's this world of fitness studios, of maxing with a lot of X's, just all this idea of always being at the maximum possible. And instead, Cray diagnoses that there's another strain that animates contemporary life, that of 24/7 capitalism. So if time is money, then you have to max that time and max that money. There is never an actual state of rest. But you know what is really interesting? From Newton to Crary to Han, laziness is always in relation to others, in relation to society. It's not within ourselves. So in a way, we cannot be lazy when we do it on our own, which is a fascinating construct. So, the whole culture today, this burnout and 24/7 capitalism, are best exemplified by Jack Ma and Elon Musk. So Jack Ma here, the 9-9-6 work culture, 9 hours a day, for 6 days a week without ever stopping 9 to 9. Actually, it's 12 hours a day, sorry. I mean, from 9 to 9 for 6 days a week, and instead Elon Musk, there are ways, easier places to work, but nobody ever changed the world on 40 hours a week. Well, it's really interesting because the 40-hour work week was really a hard-fought victory for regulating the work week by labor organizers in the 19th century. And then the 32-hour, 4-day work week that is implemented now for 86% of the Icelandic workforce is another big achievement, and they seem to be even more productive that way. Not to mention, I don't know how many of you remember the 4-hour work week by Tim Ferriss. That was also quite an interesting achievement. But in response to all of this like complete burnout, we've seen these really subversive movements like tamping, which is the lie down movement, and quiet quitting here, especially after the pandemic. So this idea of really resist and passively resist the hustle of contemporary work culture and the pressure to overachieve, choosing instead to quietly, passively stay at rest. This could be also, though, one of those nuances of laziness that is closer to depression or defeatism. So even in that case, it's about understanding what's behind the screen. And in this case, we also have Twitch sleep streamers. This is Caitlin Amoranthi-Siragusa. So she actually makes into money her sleeping. And people that are observing, she has 2 million followers on Twitch. They can send her money, and every time they send her tokens, she adds an hour to her alarm clock, so she sleeps even more. So it's this idea of like really maxing sleep, which is maybe also generational, who knows? I don't really think so, but it definitely has a different nuance when it's taken over by this generation. So this is Gudetama. I don't know how many of you know this gorgeous little egg, lazy egg. It's a Sanrio character, and if you go to Japan, you see it everywhere. It's a very like fluid and slothy egg that sleeps under a blanket of bacon, and there's a whole story around it, but it's really like a hero, and the BBC called him the emblem of Generation Z, which I think is a little Generation X to say, but I don't know. It was, I found it quite fascinating. So you might have heard also of the Space Out competition in Hong Kong and also in Seoul. This was initiated by an artist, South Korean artist Woo Psyang in 2014. Now, I think it's one of the toughest things to do to space out. I think it's 90 minutes only, the spacing out. People challenge themselves to space out for 90 minutes, but even laziness in this case becomes competitive, and it's actually hard work. So there's a conundrum there. Well, if we go back in history, laziness in at least, in the century, 16th and 16th century, was about not taking your part of spiritual engagement. So it was about immorality, and it was more about piety than productivity. It was the abdication of spiritual duties. And you see here it was called accidia, accidia in Italian, which means not caring, kind of indifference. And it was also one of the capital sins. You can see it in this engraving on the left-hand side. It's only in the, after the Black Plague in the 14th century that it started being connected with actually labor like manual labor. Because after the Great Plague, 30% of the population was wiped out. So anybody who could was requested to work, because otherwise it was really a problem for society. So at that point, those who could not work were actually considered to be having the sin of laziness, and idleness was considered something that should be punished. And there were also these really interesting laws that happened, the English Poor Laws, you might have heard about it in the 1600s, that were the beginning of the British welfare state. So it was a tiered system to determine who would be considered a worthy recipient of welfare. And in effect, it created these two classes of orphans, widows, and handicapped and frail elderly that were considered worthy. And instead, drunkards, shiftless, and lazy that were considered unworthy. And poor people were supposed to wear, those that were on welfare were supposed to wear these badges on their shoulders. So these are called the poor badges, and they came from a law that was passed also in the 17th century. The Poor Relief Act, it was called. But then we moved to 1905, and German sociologist Max Weber, who published this really important book in which he connected the spirit of capitalism to Protestant ethics. So the Protestant work ethic, he he said, encouraged the accumulation and reinvestment of wealth, which ultimately provided the cultural conditions necessary for the rise of modern capitalism. And though it was not the source of modern capitalism, it really set the conditions for capitalism to thrive. And by contrast, idleness and laziness were anathema to this Protestant ethic. At the same time, there was also this idea of mechanizing the system of productivity. You probably have heard many times of Frederick Winslow Taylor, and there were other like Frank and Lillian Gilbreth that developed systems of organizing labor to optimize time and productivity. They used charts, they used maps, graphs, and detailed time motion studies, and they really injected into our world this obsession with efficiency that came to define so much of the 20th century workplace. And in theory, the increased productivity could have given us more free time, but there's free time and free time even in this kind of situation. So employees were given free time, but the free time was taken over by hobbies, by activity. It was about keeping them away from any sins, from alcohol, from other matters that might reduce their productivity, while the upper classes were really idle, were really like taking it easy. So it was about the leisure time and the leisure class. So you might have heard of Thorstein Veblen, the sociologist that termed the leisure class for whom idleness was a symbol of success. So the idle rich, unlike the idle poor, were seen as exemplars of capitalism's functioning. So this idea also of the different kinds of laziness that can happen. Now, all of these refusal to work or taking off from work might have also been expected to be something that had to do with technology. But in truth, so much of technology was supposed to give free time to people, but it gave also a lot of anxiety. So you might remember the Luddites in the early 19th century that were destroying the textile machines because they were afraid that these machines would take away their manual work. Well, the same is pretty much happening today with AI, which I find really fascinating. But all these people are not against work. They are actually pro-labor. So it's about not taking over from work or taking off from work, but rather about maintaining the labor that is available for people to really express. Well, the laziness itself is a label that has been historically applied unfairly along class and race line, especially to those who refuse rather than cooperate with the capitalistic system and to the doctrine of the Protestant work ethic. So during the Reconstruction era, immediately following the Civil War, idleness was continually deployed as a racist trope. You see that political flyer from the Library of Congress demonstrates an attitude of antagonism where Black welfare was situated at the expense of white labor. And this trope and this stereotype has continued all the way through the 20th and even 21st century. So post-colonial scholar Syed Hussein Alatas investigated a pervasive narrative denigrating the work ethic of people from colonized Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. But in truth, European colonizers constructed a narrative that indigenous communities were insufficient in their ability and desire to work. But in reality, Alatas argues, these indigenous communities were just not interested, were disinterested in capitulating to the will of their colonizers. So their refusal to obey to that work ethic landed this community with the label of indolent. But in truth, they just didn't want to comply with a system that was not theirs. Not to mention Black Folk, The Gift of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, where the great sociologist talked about the acts of refusal during slavery on the side of Black people that were striking and tried to withhold labor or engage in work slowdowns to regain a modicum of agency within the system of constricted labor. And even in that case, they were defined as lazy. So these tropes have continued. They're pernicious stereotype They've gone through the 20th century, and we can find them again in a more blatant case study when Ronald Reagan started talking about welfare queens and used this particular stereotype as an issue in his campaign. So it was the welfare queen in his mind was the figurehead that he used for dismantling the social safety net. It was about this idea of a black woman living on off of public assistance who lived a life of indolent luxury and freeloaded off the backs of the white working class. We remember it as if it were yesterday, and it's coming back, as you well know. But it's important to understand how absolutely complex this label of lazy is and how it's been misapplied to categories of people, including disabled people. So there's the whole ableist trope of laziness. And Alison Kafer, who's a great disability scholar, coined the term crip time, you might have heard about it, to acknowledge how illness can alter an individual's relationship to temporality. And of course, challenge the normative rules about productivity and timetables. This is a work by artist Caroline Lafargue, who unfortunately could not be with us tonight, but we've been in touch with her a lot, and it's really beautiful. It's called Crip Time, and it depicts the meticulous process of sorting pills over 10 minutes, a reflection of her experience living with a chronic illness. So it's a durational video that tries to give you a different sense of time, which is also what laziness is about. So alongside all these cynical deployments of the trope of laziness, there's also the side of laziness as a form of defiance. You might have heard about Paul Lafargue, because he's considered the patron saint of laziness. And he was a Franco-Cuban socialist and happened to be also Karl Marx's son-in-law. And he wrote this seminal text, in 1880, The Right to be Lazy, while he was in prison. He had been imprisoned in Paris because he was distributing all of these different leaflets. But The Right to Laziness is a manifesto that questions the fundamental labor value, the value of labor in society. And, it's a rebuttal, actually. It's interesting because it's a rebuttal of an 1848 socialist declaration of the right to work, which demanded full employment for all willing citizens. And instead, Lafargue argued that, oh no, people should work a maximum of 3-hour days. So it's this idea really of refuting all of these new systems that have been imposed. And there are some characters in literature from Bartleby to Oblomov that are really about that, about taking off from society. And Bartleby refuses to participate in labor expected of him with his refrain, I would prefer not to. So it really is about really denying work. And now we go back to Guy Debord, who in 1952 graffitied never work on a Paris wall. And that subsequently became the rallying cry for the Situationist International. The Situationists were intent on making visible and disrupting the functions in capitalist domination over everyday life. And this was one way for them to do it. You see also Marcel Duchamp, who was very inspired by the Situationists, was fond of referring to himself as a lazy artist. And even his idea of working with ready-made was a way to really show how that was the way to be an artist. He also had proposed an institution that was called the Home for Adult Lazies, an orphanage for young lazies, in which residents were forbidden from working. And there's a theorist, his name is Maurizio Lazzarato, who framed Duchamp's creative process as an act of sabotage against capitalist culture in the art world. So even the art world is seen as a capitalist system and a capitalist market, and therefore artists react to it, some in even more vehement terms. Laziness is not simply a non-action or a minimal action, Lazzarato writes of Duchamp. It involves taking a position with respect to the conditions of existence under capitalism. This is carried on also by other artists, like the Croatian Mladen Stilinovic, who thinks that laziness is fundamental to the artistic process, and we'll hear from Kenneth Goldsmith afterwards about this. and that the artist at work was his performance in which he was shown just sleeping for hours at a time. Chantal Akerman also is another great example. For this 1987 movie actually called Portrait of a Lazy Woman, she depicts herself in bed, doing nothing, having a cigarette, reading a book, doing absolutely nothing. I'll get up in a minute, maybe not, we'll see. And it's almost like defying the viewer. It's almost like frustrating the viewer with this long duration and with this nothing happening. It's a short meditation on laziness, like much of her work, and it is beautifully frustrating. Lee Lozano probably is the most extreme of these cases. Wonderful artist based in New York who carried all of this to like great conclusion. In 1969, she decided to have this general strike piece as a work of art in which she said that she would not participate in anything having to do with the art world and the art market for a year. So she just dropped out and nobody saw her in galleries, at openings, etc. But then, the year after, she went much further and she decided to drop out completely from society, from the art world, and from all other public situations. And nobody saw her again. So that is the extreme act of refusal and disappearance that continues to fill me with awe. I don't know about you, but it really is incredibly extreme. Well, Timothy Leary at the the great human being in San Francisco is where he first talked about turning on, tuning in, and dropping out. And as a psychedelic pioneer, he popularized this phrase to refer to a psychological reconfiguration of the inner self to be achieved through the use of psychedelics. And many people thought of him as just like a lazy person, but instead, his call to drop out was a form of active rejection of the structures of middle-class experience. So even in that case, it was a way to rebel. Many people were rebelling against these different forms, but they were doing it in some cases in very violent terms. This you see here, part of my childhood. This is Milan in 1976, where Autonomia Operaia, which was trying to find a better world for laborers beyond work, not without work, was actually smashing cars and destroying. It was really quite a violent moment in Italy at that time. It was during all of the terrorist years. And the same was happening in the United States with less vehemence, perhaps, and less violence with the Zero Work Collective. You see the journal here from 1975. Another interesting symbol of laziness and also of its gendered nature is the lazy boy that was introduced after World War II. It was always about guys being on the lazy boy, And so it was about guys on the lazy boy, and so who takes care of the house? It's the woman. That's why, there's also at the same time this whole idea of wages for housework posters, and women instead trying to really talk about dad lounging on his lazy boy while instead the mother was working and should actually be compensated for domestic work. This is something that we're hearing also a lot about today. The couch potato continues. And the couch potato is very interesting because even in this case, it's really connected to a particular moment in history. There's no couch potato without television. So it was really about the television in particular that held this strong association with laziness, and there's a very famous one where Homer also has a beer on his belly, and Costanza, not the beer, but always some snacks. And this is a more up-to-date form of laziness, or at least laziness within society, which is Lackerism. It's Richard Linklater's Lacker movie of 1991 about this group of kids, of teenagers in Austin that are just hanging out. They're just hanging out together, and they think that this hanging out and slacking off will lead to something better. They're very optimistic. They're very hopeful. It's not about the laziness of today. The social refusal is a track to something that is much better. This is what happens today, the bed rot, the idea of bed rot, the digital lethargy that Tong Hui Hu, whom we will hear from later on, calls the current kind of like version of the television. These are the sugar-coated sisters that simplify, we're gonna rot the day away. So this idea of bed rot can be understood also as a form of retreat, of non-confrontation of contemporary reality, and a form of rest that is made possible by the convenience of apps and the availability of apps. The work of Fields Harrington, who is an artist based in New York, and now this work is at MoMA PS1 if you want to see it in Greater New York, the exhibition there, is about not the distribution of work, but rather the distribution of rest. He's been working with this deliverista, who's Gustavo Aiche, so he's a messenger, he delivers everything. So whenever the bike is in the museum at MoMA PS1, Gustavo is getting his salary of $24 an hour. When the bike is not there, it means he's making deliveries. So having the bike there and giving him some rest is a way to redistribute the rest and try to be more equitable, which is also what Black Power NAP are doing, Niva Costa and Sosa. They are two artists that have been working together, and they have been talking about the fact that there's a sleep gap. It's actually proven. There's a racial inequity of sleep. There are public health studies that have shown that Black Americans are not getting as much sleep as white Americans. And so Black Power NAPS is a project to counteract the fatigue of living in America under the conditions of racial capitalism. So you've seen here all these different forms of laziness. It's fascinating. It makes you wonder, am I working too much? What am I doing? Who am I? Why am I on the world? But you know what the first prompt was for me to talk about laziness? It was about politics. It was about the fact that I was feeling guilty for the laziness of not protesting as much as our sisters and brothers in Minnesota have done against ICE. And I've been wondering, why is it that we are not complacent? Maybe we're just like shocked and not able to move anymore. So maybe it's an inertia rather than a laziness. But I think that it's important also to wonder whether we have all become lazy or not lazy enough. And tonight, we're here to talk about it with 5 great speakers, Catherine Bear, Eric Blank, Kenneth Goldsmith, Autumn Knight, and Marina Van Zuylen. Actually, Autumn is in Japan, so she'll join us with Zoom. And Eric is nearby, but he had a family emergency, so he's also going to be on Zoom. And I'm going to start right now by introducing the first video. I'm going to actually have there's also these 3 people that are going to reach us via video. And I'm going to start with Brian O'Connor.
The very idea of idleness seems to carry the promise of freedom, and it's often understood, even if not explicitly, as a freedom from certain things, a freedom from duties, from what was once called the rat race, from competition, from the effort to gain recognition and prestige. What that tells us, perhaps, is that idleness is a highly socialized ideal. It's a reaction to an array of social practices. Furthermore, and here I think it has its critical power, it's a reaction against social practices that are specific to particular phases of human history. It doesn't mean doing nothing whatsoever. Some thinkers have thought so, kind of vegetation, a mindless and easeful drift. This image of idleness suggests a complete loss of self, that is, of no longer being an entity that's concerned about itself and that wants to negotiate its way through the world or to secure its own future. Although that's a fairly rare idea of what idleness might amount to, it's one that's terrified a range of European philosophers since the Age of Enlightenment. Since then, philosophers have begun to think of the human being as a site of work. We had to bring integrity to our lives, to raise ourselves above our natural inclinations. We would make ourselves free by becoming socially useful moral beings. Education would turn us into practical, task-oriented workers. Arguments in favor of idleness were therefore treated as a denial of our social and moral potential. For those philosophers, in short, freedom meant the suppression of our tendencies toward idleness. Those Enlightenment philosophers now appear as the theorists of conventional society. They uphold the value of those social practices which may be experienced as constraints or burdens. Idleness as a form of freedom, then, is in principle a form of social rebellion. It represents a rejection of the social pressures that make us into relentless workers who may never be satisfied with ourselves.
And now we're going to try to connect with Autumn. I think she's already there. Autumn? Autumn?
Hi.
Hi. Hello. Oh, there you are. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take it away. Can you see us? Can you see the audience?
I can't see the audience. It's
beautiful. It's quite a gorgeous audience, so I can tell you.
Thank you so much for including me in this conversation. And I think that there's a video that should start playing first for the top of my presentation.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, 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 welcome to the church of nothing. The text is a soft proselytizing. The concept, dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. The text grapples with defining nothingness. What are we going to do in this space? Are we supposed to do nothing in this space but believe? Colonization of time. No regulation of maximum hours worked. Inequality. Mireille was at the academy with me. She's an architect. She tells me about the manifesto letter that architects send to students about time. And I'm imagining that's related to the French thing, but I'll connect the dots at some point. Shift dollars to energy hours. That's what we all have equally to give. Let's get some more shots in the camera. Equally to give, equally to give. That's what we have to give, our time. That's the only thing we got to give is our time. And we give it up. We give it away. And ain't nothing for ourselves. And then what happened? Then we go out and do in the world? Violence. What is laziness, huh? What did they tell you? That laziness is a wickedness. What I want to know is, do you ever think about how this concept has been preserved? That time is money, repeated to you over and over and over and over and over again. Chill, it's okay. Do nothing. Nothing at all.
Okay. So this work was commissioned by an organization a project called Locales in Rome. It was presented at the Palazzo Altom's Museo Nazionale Romano. And the performance was entitled Church of Nothing, Theater of Nothing. And this was based on my interest in dolce far niente, which was a proposal that I presented to apply for the Rome Prize, like the sweetness of doing nothing. And the proposal was to study dolce far niente. So essentially to do nothing or to study doing nothing. And for me, part of the politics of the question of who gets to do nothing for me was in the ask, in the proposal. Like, do I, as an artist, have the right to propose to study doing nothing at this level for an entire year? And the proposal was accepted. Of course, there's, research, and I conducted interviews. And at the end of my time there, I presented this this performance in this church. And part of this And part of this performance was about sort of kind of bringing together some of my experiences in Rome and in Italy over the year, and also the format of Black Southern um, preaching, right? Because I'm in this church, so sort of transposing like my own relationship with the South and a perceived culture of laziness inside of this church in Rome and Italy, which is another geographical region that is associated with laziness, not only in that particular region of Europe, but even in the country itself. So it was important for me to sort of inside of that performance, sort of question the idea of dolce far niente and question the idea of laziness to a group of mostly people who are Italian. And so after that, I started creating a series of works sort of investigating the nothingness. So I'm still trying to figure out what the sweetness part is, because I think the sweetness part actually is related to a type of privilege. But so I decided to think about who can do nothing and when. So slide. Next slide. So these are just a sample of projects that I've started doing since that time, since 2022. And I started naming a bunch of projects, nothing, because I wanted to put forth this idea. Oh, good. I'm almost out of time. Okay. Next slide. So this is a project called Bluff. So my style is mostly improvisational, but I wanted to create a performance project where even I had no context for what was going to happen when I entered the room. Like what does it mean to be a lazy artist? What does it mean to put myself as a Black performer, to put myself in a position where I had to grapple with being perceived as unprepared and lazy, but also tasked with presenting the most that I can, like to almost exhaust myself in that process. Next slide. And this is another shot from that performance. Next slide. And this one too. So some of the juxtaposition is about also the high production mixed with the low preparation for the work. So dealing with that paradox of like not actually being able to fully engage with nothingness. Next slide. This is a work I presented at the beginning of 2026. It included 3 performers and myself, and the performers really experimented with nothingness in the midst of like many objects, right? So what does it mean for the bodies to become nothing, to do nothing, to expect nothing, in this sort of like corporal embodied way? Next slide. Next slide. And I might have one more slide. Okay, I think that might be it. Okay, I think my 7 minutes is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Autumn. That was great. Big applause is coming to you. That was very, very nice. So now we have Kenneth Goldsmith.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much for making this happen and that amazing introduction. So we're thinking similarly, so I'm going to cover some of the same turf that you did, Paola. Okay, so Oh, okay, fantastic. Okay. In 1939, the poet W.H. Auden wrote that poetry makes nothing happen. And while many people might view this as a complaint, I think Auden had something else in mind. The conscious act of making nothing happen is an act of resistance. And you might ask, a resistance to what? To efficacy, to pragmatism, to solutions, to capitalism. In fact, Auden affirms this in the next line of the poem, writing that, quote, "Poetry survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper," unquote. And he's right, titans of industry never had any use for poetry's valuelessness, and the fact that they would never want to tamper with it makes it possible one of the few spaces that's still able to elude the long arm of late capitalism. While few would disclaim poetry's true value, its intellectual and emotional pricelessness, it's harder to decipher its transactional terms. Its uselessness is so integral to it that the poet Charles Bernstein once quipped that printing a poem on a piece of paper actually devalues that piece of paper, rendering it useless for more productive things like love letters or invoices. Poetry's making nothing happen is part of a long lineage of oblique strategies of active passivity that come in handy when productivity and capitalism fails, as it often does, stretching from Bartleby's refusal, as Paula said, to the drift of the Parisian flaneur, from the strident no-work slogans of the situationists to the cultivated laziness of the Beat Generation, from the anti-establishment idol of the hippies to John Cage's gentle aphorisms such as, "How to improve the world, you'll only make matters worse." Toward the end of his life, I became friends with John Ashbery, America's most decorated poet, who in his lifetime published over 30 collections of poetry and was awarded with everything from a Pulitzer to a MacArthur. Sitting in his living room at his apartment on 9th Avenue, one evening over martinis, I was bemoaning the fact that earlier in the day I had received a royalty check for a book of my poems amounting to $11.19. And that's $11.19 in Canadian dollars. And John shrugged and shook his head sympathetically and asked, "Do you know how much I make every year in royalties from my 30 books combined?" And I stared silently at him, expecting a princely sum. And he sighed. He said, "In a good year, I'm lucky if I clear $2,000. Although drenched in cred, at the end of his life, like most poets, John was broke and was scrounging about for ways to make money. Clearly, executives never tampered with his poems, and as a result, even by his own account, John Ashbery made nothing happen. But boy, did John ever make things happen, just ask any poet. Unconstrained by market demands, poetry is almost obligated to take risks, which is why poetry is at its best when it's at its most experimental. Yet many poets, desiring to feel productive, trick themselves into the idea that their poems can be effectual, politically or otherwise, hoping to partake in some sort of mainstream cultural conversation. And this is a betrayal of the true power of poetry, which once again is the power to make nothing happen. For the past 30 years, I've developed a literary practice that's a response to these conditions that I call uncreative writing. It's not too different from appropriation-based art, whereby I reproduce previously existing texts, republishing them as my own. In 2000, for instance, I retyped a copy of the day's New York Times word for word. The result was a 900-page book that took a year and a half to complete. I've transcribed fat books of weather reports, sports games, and 1010 Wins traffic reports. And since 2002, I've been working on this project called Retyping a Library, which is exactly what it sounds like. After 25 years, I've transcribed about 800 books, and I'll stop when I hit 1,000. Okay? These projects are critiques of originality and labor, and while I'd never be called lazy, I expend an enormous amount of energy with little to no recompense. But nobody works harder than artists for so little in return. When asked at the end of his life how it was being an artist, Jean Dubuffet said, "I feel like I've been on vacation for the past 40 years. Similarly, Mike Kelly summed up his art practice in one sentence: more love hours than can ever be repaid. The project of surrealism revolved around the idea of making nothing happen. They were fond of sleeping in public, bringing dreams out of the bedrooms and onto the streets. While most of us deem sleep a necessary remedy, a state of repair and restoration, the surrealists felt that having to be awake was an unwelcome interruption to sleep. Their greatest wish was to exist in this continual dream state, and Breton wrote, quote, "I believe in the future resolution of these two states, dream and reality, into an absolute reality, a surreality," unquote. In his never-ending quest to join these two disparate states, Breton started attending seances, which soon became required attendance for all aspiring surrealists. During the seances, Breton noticed several of his acolytes nodding off. One in particular, the poet René Crevel, revealed himself to be a sleep talker, babbling nonsense in the twilight of his consciousness. In Crevel's dozing, Breton discovered a sort of portable seance, one that could be whisked out of the tomb-like silence of the parlor and dropped into noisy public spaces, inserting the dreamer into the midst of the crowd. And from then on, he convinced Crevel to start falling asleep in cafes, where once presumed to be fast asleep, and there was always some idea that this was just theater. Crevel was peppered with questions by a circle of awake poets who transcribed these conversations as the basis for future poems. And Breton was delighted with the results. Crevel's answers, of course, were perfectly surreal. His responses never quite matched up with the questions, which he took as direct manifestations, culled from the subconscious, a balancing act between wakefulness and sleep. Now, rivalries grew among the surrealist poets as to who could be the best public sleeper. Commenting on this, Breton wrote, "Every day they want to spend more time sleeping. Their words recorded intoxicate them. Everywhere, anywhere, they fall asleep. In cafes, amidst the beer glasses and saucers." One aspiring sleeper posted a note on his door, literally, each night before going to bed that read, "The poet is working." Proposing sleepwalking as an optimal widespread societal condition, Breton asked, when will we have sleeping logicians, sleeping philosophers? It seems the surrealist vision of a dream culture has been fully realized in today's technologies. We're awash in a new electronic collective unconscious. Strapped to several devices, we're half awake, half asleep. We speak on the phone while checking our social media feeds, partially hearing what's being said to us while simultaneously answering direct messages. I can't help notice that we've become very good at being distracted. Breton would be delighted at our ability to truly make nothing happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenan. Now we have a video from Devon Price, who is a social psychologist and professor of clinical practice at Loyola University in Chicago.
The laziness lie is a set of 3 really damaging cultural myths that many of us absorb. The first tenet of the laziness lie is that your worth is defined by your productivity. The second tenet is that you can't trust any of your own needs or limitations because those things will only be a threat to your productive capacity and therefore your worth as a human being. The final tenet of the laziness lie is that there's always more that you could be doing, that you as an individual are responsible for not only working and financially supporting yourself, but that you need to be the village that raises your child, that you need to keep a perfect home, that you should be constantly optimizing your body and growing your skills, and on and on and on. This myth comes to us from a lot of forces, but a major one was the Puritans. As Turtle Island was initially being settled, the Puritans believed that people who worked hard and worked independently in the colonies were people who had already been chosen for heaven, and that if a person was struggling or depressed or in otherwise need of support, that was a sign they had already been condemned to hell, and that it was actually immoral to give them any support because it would just make them stay lazy. The same rhetoric was used to argue against giving newly freed Black Americans reparations after the end of slavery. It was used to call industrializing workers who were striking for benefits lazy. It was used against mothers who needed social welfare support in the Reagan 80s. And this fear of laziness lingers with us very deeply today. In my own work, I've looked at the science on productivity and burnout, and I found that consistently, people are actually only capable of working for about 3 to 4 hours per day. When we push ourselves past this capacity on a regular basis, we run the risk of our bodies breaking down, and it's frankly not sustainable for us to expect people to be fully independent, full agents who are in charge of everything in their own lives without any support. We are a community, and we're not lazy for needing that kind of support.
I know, very good. And now we have Eric Blanc beaming in. Eric, are you there? Yay.
I'm here, yes.
You're like Oz, the Wizard of Oz. Yes. Good to see you. Go ahead, floor is yours.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everybody. Sorry for not being in person. I have a toddler at home who is sick. I was asked in particular to speak a bit about, this broader question of what laziness might be able to tell us about the relative absence or maybe not absence of resistance and political resistance in the United States. My background is I'm an organizer, I'm a labor organizer. I also teach labor studies. So I'm going to look at it a bit from an organizing standpoint and from a class standpoint. And I would just say that the first thing worth putting out there is I do think as a goal for the labor movement and for sort of anybody looking for equality, we want a society in which everybody has the right to laziness, the right to more free time, and so that work can be a creative mode of expression individually and collectively and not sort of an imposed burden. But that's obviously not the type of society we live in. And it's just worth flagging that creates a lot of very hard contradictions, because it's just not the case, for instance, that most working people in this country or other countries have the ability just to work less. Almost by definition, that what it means to be working class is that in order to survive, you have to sell your labor, and that your actual wiggle room to work more or less, most people would like to be able to work less. Like if you look at the data on people who want to spend more time with their families, and this is one of the major difficulties in the United States, particularly after 50 years of neoliberalism, in which only 6% of private sector workers have unions, is that workers actually don't have control over their work. And that's both in, white collar jobs, but as, particularly non-college educated workers as well. So I think we should distinguish between maybe the space that professionals have to work less, because there is this sort of, I'm in academia, there's definitely this mode of capitalist productivity in the professions, but that's actually a different problem than the major problem facing most people, which is just actually a lack of space materially to have time for laziness. And so I think there's actually a contradiction here, because it takes a lot of work to build a society in which people don't have to work as much. So if you think about the 40-hour day, which is a week, which was mentioned earlier, it took decades of work. It took decades of very, very hard organizing to win that. So there's not a sort of individual escape route to get the type of laziness we deserve. It actually takes quite a bit of work. And I don't think that type of work is reducible to capitalist sort of propaganda. It's in fact probably a necessary, if maybe ultimately kind of tragic mechanism to win more time for everybody. And I would say that raises the question of, well, why is there not more mass resistance in the United States? To what extent does that reflect a laziness on the part of Americans? And when the question was posed to me that way, to be honest, my initial reaction was to push back, and I think it is worth pushing back against this framing, because we've seen even in the last year or two, huge numbers of people in the United States taking, Eli, no, ahorita no, buddy. Sorry, this toddler. Gali, you have to take him. Let's go. Sorry, this is this is kid life. So yeah, it take a huge amount of okay, totally lost my train of thought. Okay, why is there not more resistance? So yeah, there's been massive demonstrations. The No Kings rally, I'm sure if I were in person, I would say raise your hand. You can raise your hand. But imagine I'm in person, so you can look around the room, tell me how many people raised their hand. How many people went to the No Kings rally? But earlier this year in the springtime, it was the largest demonstration in the history of the United States. Black Lives Matter before that were some of the biggest demonstrations in the history of the United States. What we've lacked in the United States is not actually large numbers of people willing to take action. What we've lacked is organization, and that in turn is related to, I think, what the much deeper problem is, which is not laziness, but a sense of powerlessness. So people will go to one-off actions. They will vote, they will go to a rally, but it's actually much more difficult to convince people to keep on spending their time organizing and participating in collective action, because in our lifetime, so few of us have seen that bear fruit. So there becomes a vicious cycle where neoliberal capitalism takes away our collective good. It makes it harder to win, makes us more isolated. We're stuck on our phones. We feel less connected. We're less members of unions, less parts of churches. All of this kind of basic infrastructure of communality gets frayed. And it makes it harder then for us to imagine communal solutions to our problems, and we'd end up trying to find individual solutions. That is the ultimate, I would say, obstacle we face as an organizer. It's very rare when I talk to working people or colleagues that they'll say, "Oh, I disagree with you," or if I go canvassing for a DSA candidate, I'm a member of DSA. I'll talk about that to close out, but it's very rare that you'll hear people say, "Oh no, the system is working great. I really love Trump. Things are going well." There's parts of the country where you hear that, but even to be honest, I just spent 2 weeks in Middletown, Ohio, where JD Vance is from, because I'm writing a new book about evangelical organizing, because they're much better at organizing than us. And even there, they looked at like Trump and all of that really as the lesser evil. So the idea that there's satisfaction with what's going on is just not the case. Most people just don't fundamentally feel like they have power. And then the question becomes, well, how do you help people get that sense of power? And sometimes these are external events that can trigger that. Minneapolis was mentioned before. So, something like having Trump invade your city and your state with ICE provoked, one of the most inspirational forms of collective resistance I've seen in my lifetime. There's so many things move so quickly with all of Trump's craziness, but I think it's just worth sitting with the fact that, think about how many people not only took to the streets and protected their community after Alex Preddy and Renee Good were murdered, but they understood that being out there to support their undocumented neighbors meant they might get killed too. And as somebody with a little kid, that's heavy, and I think it's very beautiful, and it's worth kind of owning that win, because sometimes this is the problem. Even when we win, life goes back to normal, and a lot of people didn't even fully absorb how big of a deal it is that Minnesota defeated Donald Trump. There's a reason why ICE has not been invading other cities to the same extent as they tried in Minneapolis. So you have a win there in response to provocation. But sometimes it just takes sort of crazy people in the good sense, like organizers. This is why most people aren't organizers. There's something about our disposition, which is maybe masochistic, or I don't actually think that's true. For me, I've been thinking a lot about religion and organizing, and I'm a socialist. I'm very secular. I'm like a Jewish socialist. But there's an impetus there. I don't think I keep on organizing just because I expect to see wins every day. I sort of have a purpose, and I feel like my purpose in life and my meaning I get from my community, and the reason I work so hard on organizing, even though it often fails, is because it's, I don't see how to engage in this world in a way that allows me not to go crazy without spending a huge amount of time working to make it better. And that might sound cheesy, but I believe fully in cringe, I think and earnestness is actually pretty important. And I would just end then by saying, like, think about how much work it took, in the good sense, to elect Zoran Mamdani. that you're talking about over 100,000 volunteers, like 1.5 million doors knocked. And if anyone out there has canvassed before, it's really hard work. And it's actually, it's not like most people even respond on the doors. It's really exhausting. And so I think it's good not to be lazy when the world is this bad. Frankly, I think it's actually, there's a moral duty we have to work really hard to make it better. And I'm proud of the work that people did to elect Zoran, that we did. And that just last night, I was partying at home. I'm sort of under quarantine because of my son's illness, but I was like live streaming with my friends because so many people had spent so much time trying to elect a change, and people like Daria Lisa and Claire Valdez and these union fighters who I've worked with as organizers got elected. And it's a really big deal. I think we're like changing the history of the United States finally and providing an alternative to Trumpism. And I'll just end by saying that takes a lot of work. That type of work is good, and it's going to take a lot more work to build a society in which we can be lazy. And I would hope that most of us can maybe work less on the forms of sort of ego-driven work that capitalism wants us to do, and to work a lot more on the collective, meaningful forms of solidarity that capitalism does everything to destroy. So I'll leave it at that and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Eric. That was so excellent. Big applause, yeah. And I stand corrected. Maybe we're not so lazy, so thank you. And I'm going to call to the podium now Catherine Bayard.
Wow, okay, thank you. I'm just digesting the not at all lazy energy of the ideas this evening. I want to thank Paula and Alex for the invitation to, I want to thank Paula and Alex for the invitation to participate in the Salon on Laziness. It is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I'm honored and humbled to be here. So, here we go. I'm an artist, and I'm an artist, and I'm best known for new media artworks that challenge what I see as an overwhelming cultural impulse toward empty productivity. Using some of my own artworks as examples tonight, I'm hoping to expose two faces of laziness. Both the lure of Gen Z's wisdom of self-care and opting out, and my own Gen X conviction that work isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I'm also a writer, and my art embodies theories I've developed which inform my take on laziness. I use these concepts to look at how non-human objects and human objects are fungible under conditions of racial capitalism. And nowhere is that fungibility more evident than in automation, a major subject of my work. That's to say, in my Gen X sense that work persists, we can also see that when work remains to be done, it has historically fallen on the shoulders of women, people of color, gender nonconforming people, people without papers, and so on, exactly the human objects with whom OOF seeks to catalyze camaraderies and who are at risk of automated precarity. So what's automation? Automation is getting something or someone to do a task in your stead. The key is the task gets done and you didn't have to do it. This sounds lazy, so how come it drives such an enormous amount of tech dev for productivity? You typically automate a task that's unsafe or unsavory, so you'd rather not do it yourself. But if that feels innocently lazy, the etymology of the word robot, from a root meaning forced labor or servitude, connects automation to slavery and the far from innocent exploitation of dehumanized people. The AI industry's endeavor to automate thought is merely a knowledge work update in automation's long, sordid history. In this situation, not only do we need to cultivate solidarity with machines, we also need to take a lesson from our non-human comrades. And I want to suggest we use what I call decelerationist aesthetics for some lazy insurrection. Decelerationist aesthetics advocates for a slowdown, not to triumphantly overthrow capitalism as the accelerationist motto, "the only way out is through," would have it, but rather as a minimal mechanism for merely subsisting inside the push and pull undertow of capitalism's currents. Here's what I mean. In decelerationist aesthetics, the aesthetic properties of objects provide a means to work against capitalism's imperative for every object, humans included, to be of value. By aesthetic properties, I mean how an object feels, tastes, looks, sounds, and smells. These are all properties that can resist. For example, in this piece, artificially intelligent robotic office chairs move very, very, very slowly, avoiding each other and blank sheets of printer paper. A slow object can grind work to a halt, like quiet quitting. In this piece, automation doubles down on the ethos of empty productivity with literally empty robot chairs. But far from liberating humans from work to live in lazy leisure, automation invisibilizes human labor just as it joins humans and bots in a race to the bottom. If big tech sells us a perpetually postponed promise of laziness, it's clearly a gimmick, in Xian Nai's definition of the gimmick as something that simultaneously works too hard and not enough. So the gimmick itself has a lazy attitude about work and carries a kernel of those two lazy faces. Taking this further, consider other aesthetic properties. Encrusted or calcified objects can persist, refuting erasure, like evidence in the fossil record. This series of fossilized USB devices imagines a post-apocalyptic future. Only always-on gadgets and the planet itself remain, so the Earth comes forward to hug these little devices, doomed to perpetual work, since after human extinction, there's no one left to turn them off. Swollen or sticky objects can gum up the gears of capitalism, like industrial sabotage. Here I perform as an obese data body, clicking away, locked into the overproduction of data through compulsive online actions. This piece seeks solace in fat form, and I'm quoting myself, because in decelerationist aesthetics, the aesthetic properties, proclivities, and performances of objects come to defy the accelerationist imperative to be nimbly individuated. Decelerationist aesthetics rejects atomistic liberal humanist subjects as a unit of self too consonant with capitalist relations and functions. The aesthetic form of objects resists capitalist speed and immediacy by taking back and taking up space and time. So is there lazy potential in dragging one's feet?
Welcome to blockchain. In this game, you're a computer and your job is to crack my encrypted key using brute force. That means you guess until you get it right. My key is a 64-digit hexadecimal code, so it uses the numbers 0 through 9 and the letters A through F. Are you ready? I just generated a key. Let's see if you can use brute force to crack it. Computer, open brute force. This is my guess. A6A00BB980E4CCD88A8593CD2038E703E6E2243D9C6A4A54off5E462169F5CF2. Let's check if the guess is correct. Alexa, open verify encryption. No, it is not correct. Okay, let's try this. 712C8EC2148C2640E05533870D4DB65B9F.
Or is laziness doomed to toxic masculinity and weaponized incompetence, even when masquerading as the quaint Bartleby I prefer not to of a canned non-response? This slow-loading image embodies an email auto-reply script where, sorry, I'm away from my desk, only masks bureaucratic redundancy. So we might ask, is laziness really the most generous possible read of contemporary culture's drive to automation? That is Elon Musk a fascistic, egomaniacal, white supremacist natalist seeking galactic domination? Or is he just too plain lazy to drive his own car? Beside the outright devastation emanating from Silicon Valley's push to automate everything, is there lazy redemption in leaving some things unautomated? In We Grasp at Straws, 5 mocap dancers interact with giant foam straws. The video eventually reveals that each is a finger, so that the 5 collectively embody a hand grasping at straws, the basic first step of weaving a basket. This is part of a larger project inside outsourcing that explores basketry as both the oldest technology and the only mass production form that isn't mechanically automated. The dancers end lazing among the straws, and I propose that in this ongoing cycle of being inside outsourcing, laziness isn't opting out so much as a dopaminic pharmacon that keeps us going. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you so much. Now we're going to hear from Tonghui Hu, who's a poet and a scholar of digital media and professor of comparative media studies at MIT. That was great.
First, I don't think laziness is truly possible or even desirable under digital capitalism. If laziness is a prescription to consume and socialize and veg out, that just describes our work as users today, to generate data by consuming and socializing online. And while quiet quitting is great for white-collar workers as a way of rebelling against their supervisors, it works less well for precarious laborers. Under the gig work model of digital capitalism, we supervise ourselves. And finally, laziness has a racialized history that targeted Black and brown people and colonial subjects in general. Who has the right to be lazy? Almost always white people. Instead, I prefer using the words lethargy or exhaustion. Digital lethargy can resemble laziness, but with a twist. It can look like mindless scrolling while waiting with other delivery workers for the next job to find you, or to be so exhausting with interacting all day that all you can do is robotically type in LOL. It can show up in art and performance in the form of endurance, which is a less heroic alternative to resistance or refusal. If the internet is built on the idea of individual empowerment, then being lethargic can remind us of our own disempowerment. When we idle and kill time, waiting for something to happen to us, it reminds us that we are not authors of our own destiny. Instead, we are also objects that are acted upon by structural forces. Most importantly, it reminds us that we don't always have the energy or ability to be fully fledged humans, but that we must rely on other people to act.
Well, and now that was good too, very much. And now I would like to call to the podium Marina van Zuylen.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Really, thank you, and amazing audience and speakers. I grew up with an immensely lazy father. As a predictable act of rebellion, he and George Costanza turned me, for a while at least, into a workaholic. They precipitated my love affair with American Puritanism and its work ethic. Perhaps this is why some years ago I decided to turn the tables and explore what was going on with my anti-sloth and ask myself what scared me so much about being lazy. This morning, as I was thinking about this talk, I told a friend of mine about this story that Bertrand Russell writes about in his own little pamphlet about laziness. A traveler in Naples saw 12 beggars lying in the sun and offered a lira to the laziest of them. 11 of them jumped up to claim it, so he gave it to the 12th. My friend didn't laugh. My friend said, "What's the point of this story?" So I thought maybe laziness is not so obvious to other people. Maybe this thing that's been tormenting me for years and years, maybe other people, it's not that interesting to them. So I think, and the person who can simply sit, be alone in a room doing nothing, Blaise Pascal, with no need to convert time into money or into anything, is really a rare bird. I remember when the critic Roland Barthes confessed that he had failed miserably his whole life at being lazy. He craved a non-productive space. He had admired during his trip in Asia not people who stood or people who knelt, but people who simply sat. And he writes, I might be tempted to say that I make no place for laziness in my life, and that has been my mistake. It's more a question of an idleness that is imposed upon me rather than a laziness of my choosing and imposing myself upon it. Like many of us, Barthes wanted to escape the tyranny of the work ethic, the tug of public opinion, the burden of productivity. And yet he was haunted by some of the same fears that animated the likes of some of our great American Puritans, namely Jonathan Edwards, the fear of wasted time. I admit I too could have written Edwards' following quote, consider how much time I have lost today. For your having lost so much, you have the greater need of diligently improving what yet remains of your time. You ought to mourn and lament over your lost time. Barthes doesn't have the chops to embrace the like of Malevich's embrace of lost time. This is from the 1921 Laziness as the Real Truth of Mankind. I'm quoting. People are scared of laziness and persecute those who accept it. I want to remove the brand of shame from laziness and to pronounce it not the mother of all vices, but the mother of perfection. Whether we are capitalists or socialists, Malevich accuses us all from mishandling the creative potential of liberated time. I so want to agree with Malevich. He's so inspiring. But imagine that you're finishing a project and your coworker shows up late every day and never pulls their weight, even though the project is about the right to laziness. You might love the theory that convinces you that laziness is liberating, but in practice, I hate email, me. But I grumble when somebody doesn't answer my email. Perhaps I would be the target of Nietzsche's 1887 attack on the workaholic Philistine. He writes, even now one is ashamed of resting. One thinks with a watch in one's hand or a phone. Nietzsche and Malevich are blaming us for policing our anxieties with structure, for giving into work for its own sake. They want us to substitute our mechanical busyness with a radical and mindful slowness. But notwithstanding the fact that almost nobody can decide to embrace such a slow life unless they are established or retired, I have to agree with Blaise Pascal's assessment that being alone in a room doing nothing is one of the great tests of human resilience, a test that I have failed and continue to fail multiple times. And I can't help thinking that all those who tell us to embrace our boredom were profound depressives. Pascal, Schopenhauer, Heidegger, all of us. Misery, all of them. Misery loves company. But say we really want to enforce a kind of nourishing laziness. How do we do it? Urbanists and sociologists and philosophers have long argued that cities should accommodate slow spots and quiet places of retreat. Or, as the philosopher Jacques Rancière might put it, sites of potential idleness. sites where we can be lazy in a restorative and purposive way. But once we are in those slow pockets, given full permission to be lazy and vegetate, what might happen might be what Schopenhauer predicted. Almost all humans, he writes, who are secure from want and care, who have thrown off all other burdens, become a burden to themselves. This might explain why so many people secretly hate Sundays, a day of forced rest that fills us, or at least fills me, with mild depression. What would we do with ourselves if, as Bertrand Russell suggested, the workday were really only 4 hours? Remember how Mussolini forced his constituents to go to the opera he paid for fear that they would just be lounging lazily in the streets, drinking vino without veritas. Those of you who have seen Fellini's I Vitelloni remember the tight bond between laziness and depression and boredom. Still, the proponents of philosophical laziness would love us to sit alone in a space that would be useless, fragile, non-productive. Of course, without our cell phones. This would turn leisure into a dedicated activity, not a Pascalian hair shirt, but a fulfilling, non-frantic passing of time. To Rancière, under these circumstances, ennui, boredom, would shed its agonizing quality, substituting melancholy for willed contemplation. Inspired by Schiller's joyous ode to free play, it is a process that is both formal and sensual and has no transactional whiff. It's all too clear that any space and time that postpones self-reflection and erodes boredom is viewed by our moralists as something narcotic, a short-sighted means to forget our proper self. Cultivating laziness, giving it a prominent place in our psyche, in our habits, might well lead to the kind of depth that our distractions conspire to keep us from. So what do you think? Could laziness be a way of taking back control? As the world seems to be moving by at great speed, there's a good chance that laziness would indeed slow down time, conserving rather than expulsing our sense of self. The question is, do we all want to be stuck with our selfhood? I don't. So I'll send that question back to you in the question.
Thank you. Please stay. I would like to call you to sit down here. We're going to have our conversation. And we also have Autumn and Eric there. So I'm going to sit here so I can also see them. They are on Zoom, I think. So thank you for these great presentations. I mean, I wish I had grown up with a lazy father. Mine instead was the one that didn't let me sleep, that wanted, no, it's very, very interesting. So do we have Autumn and Eric also there? Autumn, are you there? Yay. So I wanted to, I don't know, and Eric, thank you so much for being here, the two of you. Autumn, I have a question for you. So Rome, right? I'm Milanese. We know, talking about the tropes and the stereotypes, we always think that Romans are like lazy bums, completely. So how did it go? I mean, when you were in Rome, were you able to actually study dolce far niente? And how did that go? Did you find it there, or you found that it was just an illusion?
No, I found it there. It's
see, yes.
It's in the culture. It's in the It's in the work culture. There's not a complete sort of doing nothing, but there definitely is like there seemed to always be an opportunity to do nothing in between tasks, right? Like there wasn't like a kind of like constant forward, pushing. The people worked, I think, worked hard, very, passionate, dedicated, present, but the opportunity to, I forgot what they call, one guy I interviewed on the street, was it called Dopo?
Dopo, huh? Dopo.
Dopo. Dopo. He was like, oh, we call it Dopo, Dopo. He was like having like he was like had on his like paint on his pants, and he was like having like a cappuccino, not a cappuccino, but like a espresso and a cigarette in the middle of the day. He was like, yeah, which is just Dopo. We like almost like we take a little bit of time.
Soon come, yes, exactly. That's how it is, yeah. Interesting. Well, I'm glad that you found what you were looking for in Rome. Yeah, and that's so nice. And now you're in Japan. You're in Japan.
Yes,
and are you
one more
pursuing?
thing?
Yeah, so go ahead.
Sorry. When I did interview some people in another like market or something in Rome, and about Dolce Far Niente, and they also had an objection to this idea. They were like, yes, we know that's a thing, but we do not. Some people were like, I do not ascribe to that idea. So I thought that was interesting that both sentiments were expressed in the culture.
Very, very interesting. So, Catherine, when you were speaking, you reminded me of a book that I found when I was doing an exhibition about the workplace. It was like 2000, right? 2001. And I had found a book called Sabotaging the American Workplace. It was amazing. It was a book that had all these like stories of the postal worker that had thrown a chewing gum in the machine. That was like, I mean, it's just like hilarious. So I wonder if you have collected, how did you come up with all these ideas? Is it because you heard about something that had happened that was similar about all this like craziness? Yeah, you could start talking and then magically it's going to work. No, you don't have. Put it back where it was. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. How do I come up with these ideas? That's a great question. I think I sometimes do it out of a feeling of frustration myself. And, things like the rolling chairs feel like such an opportunity for an intervention. They seem like they offer a kind of a backwards way of thinking about productivity. Actually, the rolling chairs this is a design history factoid, the rolling chairs are modeled on, these are cheap Staples knockoffs of the Aeron chair, which was originally designed not for dot-com era programmers, which it later sort of became famous for, but it was originally designed for nursing home patients who were at risk of bed sores. So they were going to kind of like aerate their butts with this mesh seat, and then that product failed, and it just happened to coincide with the dot-com era. But I really am interested in these ways that things like that open up like an alternate universe in a way. Like, what if it had gone the other way? Or what if we're all, it sort of presages the idea of the bed rot that you showed us in this amazing introduction. So that would be one example. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question for Eric right now. You can hear me, right? Just go, yes. Perfect. So as a labor activist and organizer, much of your work is centered around work, right? So within unions, members often identify closely with their work. So where do you stand on Paul Lafargue's proclamation that we are overly identified with our work?
Yeah, it's a really good and tricky question. I think we're in a different era than Lafargue. One of the hard things about labor organizing today is that work has gotten so much less meaningful and so much more precarious that people's, if anything, are under-identified with the work. The level of alienation has gone so high that it makes it harder to make things better. So this is, just as an organizer, it would be easier, and it is easier in places actually where workers identify more with the work because they tend to stay at the workplace. So to give you one example, part of the reason why Starbucks has been a center of union organizing since the pandemic is not that it's a worse job, but it's a slightly better job that people identify with compared to, like, say you work at a Chipotle or McDonald's. And insofar as there is an identification with the company, it means, people believed in the mission. They thought Starbucks was going to be, anti-racist and pro-LGBTQ. And it was precisely this identification with the company that set the stage then for people organizing against it because of the discrepancy between the ideals and the practice.
Interesting.
And so on the whole, I actually feel like if we could create more meaningful work with more stability, it would allow there to be space for organizing through which collectively workers could then break away from identification with the work and create a political economy in which you're not dependent on your enterprise. And I'll just say one last point on this is so much of what's unique about the United States is that labor relations is sort of uniquely based on a particular employer, whereas in a lot of Northern Europe in particular, there's sectoral bargaining. So if you lose your job, let's say there's industrial policy. So let's say your factory goes under. Well, the state in many places, in Nordic countries in particular, they'll provide you with a new job. You get retrained and it's like actually viable. And so that type of support for you to be less identified with your work is like a progressive step that gives you confidence to fight back and confidence to unionize and strike. And you actually don't care if your company goes under because you have a social safety net. But in the absence of the social safety net, we have almost the worst of both worlds, where people don't identify enough with their company to organize it, but then also don't have enough investment in their company to turn things around. So yeah, we are not in the Lafargue situation anymore. I wish we were, actually.
Thank you. It always strikes me the complexity of the different expertises and different jobs that are around these salons, and it's almost like, there's universes in all of you, in each of you. So now for Kenneth, there are some pretty great questions. One Alex did that is really good. So I saw that you were taking notes about Duchamp before. You have a very beautiful app that I want to know about. But anyway, so writing about Marcel Duchamp, Maurizio Lazzato, the same theorist, made this claim: the ready-made is a lazy technique because it involves no virtuosity, no special know-how, no productive activity, and no manual labor. And much of your work deals with ready-made texts like weather reports, the New York Times, political documents, and a process that you have called uncreative writing. Would you consider this a lazy technique in the Duchampian sense? Why is this kind of uncreativity important?
I think that I want to make some kind of connection between like Duchamp and what Eric was talking about, oddly enough.
Great.
And I think the baseline is failure, right? And of course, we all know Beckett, fail again, fail better. I was just walking through the Duchamp show before coming here, and I realized that all of his commercial ventures were all failures. He took his roto-reliefs to a trade fair. He won a medal for them because they were great. He sold none. He tried to get people to invest in and buy certificates to invest in him as a gambler in Monte Carlo. Nobody took him up on his offer. So I do want to talk, I think, and Eric mentioned that the sort of failure, the importance of failing in organizing, which I kind of think, I just have to sort of go to some kind of beautiful utopia that failure sets up, that it does. Success is so beside the point. It's the aspiration, it's the attempt of trying to kind of achieve something non-material, non-remunerative, non-transactional, truly utopian, which is why I kind of love this space of poetry, because it really can't be monetized, as I said, before. And there's just something, I just will just say that when I was doing my book Day, which is this retyping of the New York Times. I was in Chelsea, and I realized 20 minutes north of me, here I am retyping all of everything that went into that, including stock markets, because this is back in 2000 when they actually printed the stock pages. But that 20 minutes, just 20 blocks north of me, were people that were extraordinarily alienated from their own labor, that were doing the same identical work, for pay, whereas I was unalienated and doing it for no pay. So there's this kind of like, I don't know, I do think that failure, no artist, well, I don't know, because it's changing, but I think like most artists don't become artists to succeed. Most artists sort of become artists to fail in a way. And that's kind of my thought.
I keep thinking of Lee Lozano saying that piece of dropping out was the hardest work of art that she ever did.
Yeah, there's a book, I can't remember, it was a British critic that wrote, it's called I've Left. And it's a history of artists that, like Lee Lozano, that just were really important and just vanished. And of course, Duchamp was the greatest of them all. He stopped, quote, working. And in the 1960s, people were getting a little fed up with that and said that the silence of Duchamp is overrated.
Yeah, that's what you were writing. I saw you, the silence of Duchamp is overrated. I'm like, whoa, what's that? Sorry.
Yeah.
You should buy one of those screen deflectors with the LEDs. It's like,
it's okay.
I was like,
there's nothing to hide.
Well, Marina, so you were talking about spaces in the city, and I was thinking, where do I go to be completely lazy? And a Roman Catholic, I go to a church. Church is where I can zone out. But I was thinking, do you need to lie down to be lazy? But this is not what I'm going to ask you. So what I'm going to ask you, so in addition to writing about laziness, you have also written about fatigue, boredom, distraction, mediocrity, all these common afflictions of modernity that are often maligned. What draws you to these topics, and in which way do you see these conditions as connected to each other?
I think I'm most fascinated by this good mediocrity, the good enough. And I think it's because I teach at Bard, and there's amazing artists there and writers, but so many of them talk constantly about their loneliness, not being recognized, how bad writers are in the New York Times bestseller list, and it makes me so sad to see these incredible people who are tied to the success of others, when they have this extraordinary life, and yet I think it's very difficult not to measure yourself against others. And we all do, even if it's occasionally. There was a point where I thought I was the queen of boredom in boredom studies. I use something that is a negative in order actually to enhance myself. So the hypocrisy is unbelievable in my way of dealing with my own failure or success. So
I wouldn't call it hypocrisy. I would call it genius.
Know. I play a little bit on but all these boredom is something that is becoming actually even more intolerable than within the age of Saint Augustine and Pascal. I mean, many of my friends tell me they really have trouble reading novels, and they only listen to the novels now. Oh. Which I love listening to books as well, but there is something very endemic about how we're having trouble metabolizing our free time.
Mm-hmm. Before I open to the audience, I wanted to ask Autumn and Eric if you have any questions, or if for the other speakers or the other speakers to you. Have you been able to follow? You were watching on YouTube? Okay, perfect. So you don't have to, but if you have any, I want to make you feel part of this particular covenant. Mm-hmm. No? Good. Then I'm open. Not a problem. Then I'm opening it to the public. So questions, anybody, for any of our speakers? Okay, the first one is here.
Okay, thank you. This is such a great topic, and I've been thinking as you've been saying it that the other sort of opposition to work is, other than laziness, is a vacation. And I think of that because of the time of year we're in, and where I also struggle, like Marina, with vacations. I'm just wondering, because there's a lot of anxiety there somehow, and I have a hard time. And I'm just curious how you think about vacation as another form. Is it similar in these ways?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, so, I mean, it made me immediately think of, in France, les congés payés, paid vacations. And I think if you're paid to vacation, there must be something more enjoyable to them. And the reason I say, I mean, I have trouble with vacations only because of the spread and the lack of structure. And, I think as a reasonable depressive, I really do need a rhythm in my life, and suddenly all these hours. So I don't know.
And what about that thing, the sabbatical, that you guys have in academia?
I wanted to say, I mean, all three of us are academics,
Yes.
and we get paid vacations.
And
I mean,
sabbaticals.
It doesn't count.
That doesn't count, or it's
no.
obscene
No,
how
no,
little.
no.
How
in
little.
France, it's like you have 5 weeks.
I mean, what is our summer? What is our summer?
It's 5 weeks is fine. It's great.
I stop working at my job at the beginning of April, and I don't have to go back until September.
That's because you're in some fancy place.
No, but seriously, but that's, I mean, that is,
people.
no, I mean, it's an academic job. I'm just, there's, that is in fact paid vacation.
I don't know, because we're not ever on vacation because we're evaluated all the time. I mean, we're told, what have you done during your sabbatical?
Oh, poor
How
muffins, poor muffins.
No, I'm not complaining, but it's not really a vacation.
Well,
No.
not completely, but okay, I'm not feeling for you too much.
If I would like to add a tiny bit, since I just came off sabbatical a year ago.
Yes, exactly.
But I do think that, to me, this is really about alienated versus unalienated labor, because the sabbatical is the time when, for academics, we do research, we do art making. It's the time when we can concentrate. I mean, my sabbaticals are the most busy times. I'm going nonstop because it's the time that I can work fully on the things that I want to work on. So I think, to me, there's a difference between alienated and unalienated labor that we can kind of tease apart. And I would say that it's sort of different from vacation, where I think, I only take working vacations, so I don't even really know what the term means, because that's also when I am making art. But I also think about, when I think about vacation for, a normal person, I guess, it would be a time for consumption.
I don't think
right?
there's anybody normal here, so.
For consumption, for shopping, for going, eating food, just buying things, buying.
No, it's about swimming. We all have our ideas. All right, next question. Oh, she's like taking the microphone. Okay. Yeah, you go, and then we go to the hat. Okay. Yes.
Hi, thanks. My name is Osai. I'm a culture writer. So a lot of my work looks at identity and how we frame cultural conversations. And of course, as you spoke about at the beginning, Paola, the right to laziness is a theme throughout all these conversations. And
you wrote me a beautiful email about it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. So I just kind of piggybacking off of the comment about vacation, I remember a few years ago I was visiting a friend who's from Melbourne, Australia, and we were traveling up and down the Gold Coast, and I saw this man paddleboarding by himself, and I said to my friend, who's a white woman, she was like, I said, it just seems like white people are always working so hard on vacation, like to do all these activities that were once a part of survival for Native peoples, like, fishing is what paddleboarding is for. It's like actually like a survival act, right? Skiing, all these things about traversing and moving across. And we had a good laugh about that. But I want to, kind of insert this question around, does laziness, or the concept of laziness as we're framing it today, only exist within a system where there's a fundamental agreement about who gets to even be lazy or think about laziness as an access point?
Maybe this is for Eric, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested in, whoever feels,
yeah. Eric, did you hear it? Do you have an answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When we were talking a couple of weeks ago preparing for this, I think I sort of flagged something a little similar where even the framing for the event, I was like, laziness. It's the way it normally comes up in organizing is like a right-wing trope and a kind of like a racist and classist trope, where it's, like lazy welfare cheats and sort of there's a argument and I think like a basic level of condescension of a lot of even like well-meaning progressives and liberals about working class people, or like the assumption, for instance, is sometimes that they're lazy, or sometimes that they're like just watching Fox News all the time and they're brainwashed. And there's a level of maybe like intellectual laziness, moral laziness that sort of more sophisticated people have overcome. And so it's just very rarely a framework that I would think about is a useful way in the organizing sense. And I do think it's based, like, why is it okay for it's interesting, for instance, like, why is it okay for middle class people to take, there's a whole culture of taking time for yourself and certain things that would be framed in a therapeutic way. If you were to talk about that for working class people, it would just have a different valence. It would be like, oh, why are you taking time for your, this is proof that like you actually should be working harder, and there's a reason why you're not doing well. And so there's a level, I think, of assumption that if people are doing poorly, that laziness is a luxury. And I think that is just, I think, is a basic assumption that's
so
worth
it's still about class and race quite a bit. Yeah. Thank you.
Just one tiny
Go ahead,
thing.
Marina.
One of the most scathing attacks about vacation was by Adorno, and he just said basically vacations, and he talked about such a classist, but secretaries work so hard on their time during their vacation in order to impress the other workers in the office.
Oh my God, please.
Yeah. Okay. Adorno.
All right, next. Go ahead.
I've always thought it was really interesting that the word sabbatical actually comes from the Sabbath and Shabbat, which I feel, I'm Jewish, I'm not religious, but I turn off screens on Shabbat, and it's a day of no work. So as I've been listening to all of you, I mean, it's interesting because this one day, Friday night to Saturday night, I am lazy.
So true.
And it is this looking at the Sabbath or Shabbat as a day where you can't do any work is wonderful, one day a week. And it's really been a life-changing practice to look at it from like an intellectual,
so
like
right.
one day a week, no work.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good point. Where else do we have questions? There's one here and one there. Okay.
I sort of had a comment, and I think this has to do with the title, lazy, which sort of...
Question mark. There's a
question mark, right?
Yes.
It encompasses a whole bunch of different universes. On one hand, you have this whole universe associated with another word, sloth, and that has nothing positive about it anywhere, right? It's both a sin and it's bad and it's awful, whether in the labor context or any context. And then there is a whole set of beautiful human restfulness, words like lassitude and everything positive about it that gives us calm and peace. And to me, they are two very so distinct things that really none of the speakers have tried to isolate, right? One is truly beautiful, and the other is mostly annoying and sinful.
So?
Is there Does anybody want to talk about how
Okay.
any of their opinions are, you know, to me, I tend to be on the side that lazy means something I really want to enjoy.
It's a little bit what we were saying in the beginning, that it's in relation to others and to the context. Who wants to talk about it? Autumn. Autumn, do you want to say something about this? You can say no. I prefer not.
I think that most of the speakers have sort of addressed like the contextualization of laziness, and that like just the concept itself is just highly contextualized. Even the idea of sort of like, I guess, Duchamp, sort of like a Duchampian laziness, and the idea that that particular artist like has like there's something in a contrast to that labor as an artist that that holds this other space of non-laziness. I think that the coin itself just the term itself has both embedded, you know, inside of it. And I think the question mark on the word lazy is almost like kind of pushing back on the accusation that I myself am included in that. Am I calling someone lazy? So I think everyone here is trying to grapple with that term.
Yeah.
So
That's exactly the point. It's about grappling. Kenneth,
Yeah,
you
no,
want to say something?
I think that getting back to Duchamp again, you know, it was so radical for an artist to be lazy, and which is why Duchamp dropped out. It's like kind of like when Warhol said, you know, the best art is business art. What a weird thing to say, you know, in a time when there was no business at all. It was so radical, and of course it's been taken up as something else. I mean, look at Warhol with the factory, you know. And yet Warhol's whole sort of vibe was a vibe of leisure, was a vibe of clubs, was a vibe of lunches with really rich people. You know, this whole kind of weird thing. But of course, Warhol was the hardest working artist of anyone. But then again, so was Duchamp, as we know. Of course, he didn't just stop making art. He made art nonstop, assiduously, as we see there. And the production of the boxes are just so really pre-Warholian. So I think artists are playing with those temporalities quite a bit, particularly in the 20th century.
So they embody in this kind of like conundrum.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's most powerful when it's a reaction to, I'm choosing to drop out because nobody's who would ever drop out. I'm choosing to be lazy because, you know, we're all so driven. I prefer not to, you know, sort of refusal, and Warhol also with his own kind of self-automation and mechanization of his own process became, you know, sort of kind of like AI in a funny way.
Yeah, pure laziness is like an asymptote. You cannot get there. It's like when they tell you to meditate and think of nothing.
Right. And had Duchamp or Warhol ever been lazy, we never would be speaking about them today.
Course.
I mean, they were absolutely insanely driven.
So true.
Yeah,
Marina?
you put on the screen the novel Oblomov by Goncharov. It's one of the great books of all time. I hope everyone reads it this summer. And this character takes 90 pages to get one leg out of bed, and then can't find his slippers, so puts it back in bed. But what's really fantastic about the book is that Oblomov, he has a Buddhist vibe, and Schopenhauer was a great inspiration for the author. But his great friend is German and is called Stolz, which means proud in German. And his friend admires and loves him and kind of envies his ability to just live in the present. And the most powerful scene for me is when Oblomov is looking at his wife ironing a shirt, and he just spends his whole day following her elbow motion, which takes us back to labor, because of course you can't have someone's laziness without someone else's labor. But it is such a great book because it really is the book that shows you how to be lazy. Mm-hmm. Not like Bartleby, who actually is a very decisive character. So Oblomov, your summer reading. Yes.
But I think it's a precursor to Beckett's Watt.
Absolutely.
You know, where Watt does nothing but moves a dresser from one end of the room to another, which of course manifests itself in all sorts of process art and conceptual art in the 1960s.
Who's next?
Maybe me. I was a little bit missing in this discussion, this kind of take on the human condition as a biological beings in terms of like an age where we are just really in the middle of a new revolution of algorithms, and so we're being literally overwhelmed with information, and it is really beyond our capacity of understanding all these things and following up on these things. So maybe our bodies are being laid off and our minds are just like being explored. So the question is, what is your take on this like new, you know, the face of the algorithms, this new perspective?
Yay, algorithm.
I can speak to this one maybe. Yes. I mean, I actually think you're right. And I think that what we're seeing now is a real narrowing and flattening, a narrowing of gaps, flattening of categories in so many areas. So, when you were talking about turning screens off on the Sabbath, I partly love that idea, and then I think, but how would I communicate with my loved ones, my parents who can only really communicate with me through FaceTime now? So there's these ways that these devices are both the site of labor and the site of human connection and pleasure and relationships and sociality and all of these dear things that I wouldn't want to lump into the category of laziness. At the same time, I think it's precisely because, this is sort of like real subsumption, right? Like Marx's real subsumption, because so much of our lives now is being trafficked through data, through algorithms. It really is making a situation where anything that we do is constantly in the state of being work. It's not, I think we typically think about work of like going to the factory or something like that, or sitting at a desk and writing an email or something. That's work with agency, right? Where we have an intention behind the work and we are volitional about doing something. And I think that the issue with laziness is that we have to be intentional about being lazy, right? Whereas I think what's happening now is that we are really unable to, like, it's not our intentions that matter at all. It's not our desires that matter at all. It's not, all that matters is that the algorithm kind of keeps going. And this is why, I kind of ended with this idea of like a dopaminic pharmacon. I think it's really about this kind of dopaminic drive that is, it's not even really a drive. Like a drive is a little too active. Weiwei, with his idea of lethargy, we've had a conversation where he really has objected to my idea of resistance as being too active, and I think, so the idea of like gumming up the gears or something is almost like a little too active for his idea of lethargy. So I feel like there's so much that's happening at a kind of like species level, at a populational level, and this is also part of why I'm interested in kind of going beyond the individual in the idea of decelerationist aesthetics, of looking at a kind of expanded, like the fat body of big data, right? Thinking about how it can be more inclusive than just one person.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can take one last question if it's a small one. Mm-hmm.
Hi. Whoa.
Hi.
Hey. Hey. Hi. Little, maybe as a small one, but something I wanted to throw in on the if laziness is relational, and particularly looking at this political moment, you know, I know a lot of people that feel, as you spoke, I'm not doing enough. I'm too lazy to go to a protest or whatever, and I think. I would love to hear about the different ways that we can reframe that. Like I'm thinking about Deepa Iyer has a thing called the social change map, and it shows us all of the roles that are required that are maybe less visible, that require laziness as part of their action to happen to congeal the ideas. So I would love to hear a little bit about the movement building power of laziness.
Okay, power of laziness. Does anybody have a power of laziness movement?
I have a thought on this.
Yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have been thinking a lot about this, which is, so historically powerful movements in the United States and elsewhere, really like the entry point for people was music and community and sports and the sort of like outer layer of things that really have more to do with what we would consider almost like leisure activities today compared to politics. And part of the problem, you know, why the left is much weaker than this is that we've lost that tradition. And one of the things that I'm sort of studying with the right is the evangelical churches are much better about that. It's like about music, it's about community, it's about like breaking bread. And so I do think that a basic way to synthesize some of this is bringing back a culture of music and community and sports leagues and picnics, not as a substitute for like higher levels of commitment, but as an entry point, because I think that's important. I think you do kind of want to bring people into a further level of community and engagement. But the level of atomization has reached such a high level that people think politics is like what you post online or what you buy individually. And I think that that individualism has made it harder to do the kind of like collective joy which we really need, and that would sustain us, I think, through the hard times.
Thank you. Such a beautiful way to end this evening. And you know what that means? It's 8 o'clock, so we have soggy snacks and mediocre wine outside, and Marina will love it. And thank you. And I want to really thank Autumn and Eric. Thank you for being such good sports. We wish you were here with us, but you know, thank you. You were great. You know, the art outside is by MoMA staff, just so you know, because we're going to have the reception there. It's all my colleagues. I don't have anything in there, so don't look for me. But, you know, there's really great pieces. So I'll see you outside. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, you great speakers. Bye, Eric. Bye, Autumn. Ciao.